I was still holding my coat when the waiter placed the leather folder in front of me, my name already printed on the bill, while my parents laughed over crème brûlée and clinked glasses of wine I couldn't afford. My mother didn't even look up. My father just said, "You're young, you'll figure it out." The restaurant lights felt too bright, every nearby table suddenly aware of my humiliation. I smiled because I was trained to, while something cold and surgical snapped into place inside me. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter and became their consequence. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me, where are you watching from? Because I know I'm not the only one this happened to. The folder dropped with a soft thud, almost apologetic. A sleek black thing, crisp edges, weighted just enough to say, "This is important." I looked down at it slowly, already knowing. My name was printed neatly on the receipt inside, pre-run, no room for debate. I hadn't even ordered dessert. My father raised his glass, swirling the last of a Bordeaux I hadn't touched. "You'll get this, yeah? You've always been the responsible one." He said it with a laugh. Not cruel, just careless. Worse. My mother didn't even look up. She was busy wiping crème brûlée from the corner of her mouth, complaining about the texture. "Next time we'll try the place across town," she said, as if I were the chauffeur and this were a test drive. My throat tightened, not from the bill, but from the weight of understanding. This wasn't about money. This was about me knowing my place. The waiter stood silently, trying to disappear. I envied him. I handed him my card without a word, knowing I wouldn't be able to buy groceries for the rest of the week. Knowing they knew that, too. My mother offered a light, detached smile, the kind she gave to people she thought were beneath her but momentarily useful. "You don't mind, do you, sweetheart?" she asked, after the transaction was already complete. I smiled. That brittle, careful smile I'd worn my entire life, sculpted in the image of compliance. "Of course not," I replied. My voice didn't crack. I was proud of that. The last shred of pride I had left. They'd done this before. Dinner wasn't about connection. It was about dominance. They dressed it in family tradition, but I could see the truth now. This was their ritual of power. And I was the altar. I stared at the receipt after they left the table, running a finger along the final total. It was almost laughable, what they'd consumed. Wine flights, steak, imported cheese boards, things I'd never order for myself. My mother had commented on my posture during appetizers, told me I was slouching again. My father had asked if I was still doing that little job thing. The one that pays my rent. The one they've never once asked about unless it served their condescension. They didn't want to understand my life. They wanted to be entertained by how little it resembled theirs. Outside, the cold hit my face like a slap. It was early spring, one of those nights where the air cuts just enough to remind you that winter's not finished punishing you. I stood still in the parking lot, watching them pull away in the car I'd co-signed for 5 years ago. They never made a single payment. They never thanked me, either. I stared at the taillights until they vanished, until the silence was heavier than the cold. I didn't cry. I wanted to. But there was something else rising. Not sadness. Not hurt. Something sharper. Cleaner. A clarity I'd never felt before. It wasn't just the dinner. It was the years. The conditioning. The way I'd been raised to serve, not to speak. To offer, never to expect. To sacrifice without the mess of resentment. I thought of all the times I'd covered bills I couldn't afford, taken care of repairs, canceled plans, changed jobs, all to keep them comfortable, loved, proud. Proud of what, though? Of how well I played the part. Of how little I asked for in return. They'd weaponized my loyalty. They'd molded me into the daughter who always showed up, who always paid, who always smiled. And I had let them. Out of love, yes. But also fear. Because in families like mine, love is a currency with strict exchange rates. Give too little, and you're cut off. Give too much, and you're consumed. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the dashboard like it might tell me something I didn't already know. And slowly, the humiliation began to calcify. It stopped stinging and started hardening. That's the thing about betrayal, it's a forge. It either breaks you or it builds the weapon you become. I thought about all the family dinners before this one. The ones where I paid for my brother's drinks because he's still getting on his feet. He's been getting on his feet for a decade. The ones where I brought gifts and left empty-handed. Where I was told to understand that your sister's going through a rough time when she screamed at me across the table. The ones where I was always the audience to their needs, their stories, their catastrophes. Never the main character. Just the caretaker. The scapegoat. The wallet. They never expected me to keep score. But I did. Not out of spite. Out of survival. My parents weren't evil. They were entitled. That's harder to confront. Evil is easy to hate. Entitlement wears your last name and smiles at you in family photos. It makes you second-guess yourself. Makes you question whether you're overreacting. Whether you're the selfish one. But I wasn't. I'm not. I was just the only one who learned to measure love in receipts. The next morning, I pulled the bill from my purse and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Not to remind myself of what I'd lost, but to anchor the moment I woke up. I stared at the total again, not with shame this time, but with focus. I saw it for what it was, a transaction. A declaration. They'd signed the terms of war in black ink and lamb juice. And I had accepted. I didn't confront them. That's not how you dismantle narcissists. You don't storm their castle. You starve their illusion. You let them think you're still the same. Still good. Still gullible. Still theirs. But I wasn't. Not anymore. They thought I'd forget. They always do. They count on it. That's how the cycle continues, generation after generation of silent daughters paying invisible debts. But not this time. Not with me. I began to think. Not in rage, but in silence. That's where real revenge lives. In the quiet. In the planning. In the details no one pays attention to until it's far too late. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother, lovely dinner last night. So nice catching up. Let us know if you can help with that insurance paperwork next week. Love you. I stared at the words like they were written in another language. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just expectation. As always. And yet, something in me smiled. I didn't reply. Not yet. I had something better in mind. I saved the receipt. They used to call me the reliable one. Like it was a compliment. Like it wasn't a collar. From the outside, it sounded like pride. Inside, it was a sentence. I was the one they didn't worry about, which meant I was the one they never truly saw. My childhood wasn't filled with praise, it was filled with assignments. Tasks. Roles. I learned early that love was something to be earned through usefulness. That if I wanted warmth, I had to work for it. If I wanted approval, I had to outperform. And even then, it wasn't love. It was silence. Less cruelty. Less yelling. A dry nod, maybe. My reward for excellence was always more expectation. My brother, Mark, could miss school, fail a class, wreck a car, and it was always met with concern. Gentle correction. Excuses. He's just struggling right now. Boys mature later. He needs support, not shame. When I once brought home a B in advanced physics, my father folded the report card and asked if I was getting distracted by silly things. I was 12. That night, I stayed up until 3 reteaching myself the entire unit just so I'd never see that look on his face again. That look of disappointment I now understand had nothing to do with grades and everything to do with control. I remember the first time I cleaned the kitchen without being asked. I was 8. My mother looked over the spotless counters and nodded. See? Now you're being helpful. That was the moment I realized being helpful got me noticed. Not hugged. Not praised. Just seen. But for a child starved for attention, being seen, even conditionally, felt like oxygen. And so I chased it. I became the quiet achiever. The one who didn't make trouble. The one who got straight A's, brushed her teeth without being told, remembered birthdays, folded laundry right. I did it all, hoping it would one day equal love. It never did. It only made them more comfortable. As I got older, they began calling my efforts maturity. But it wasn't maturity. It was training. I was being groomed to carry the burdens no one else wanted. When Mark took out credit cards and defaulted, they asked me if I could help him consolidate. When my sister, Rachel, blew through her savings after her second divorce, I was encouraged to lend her just a little. She's family. I didn't even flinch back then. Because back then, I still believed in the story they sold me, that this was what good daughters do. That this was what family meant. But what they really meant was we break things and you fix them. They told me I was lucky to be so strong. That I didn't need as much support. That it was a blessing. And maybe that was the most manipulative lie of all, that strength meant I deserved less. That independence was a reason to be left alone. So while my siblings were coddled, I was handed more rope. They called it trust. It was abandonment. It's funny how long you can live inside a lie when it's wrapped in familiar voices. How you can keep telling yourself that the weight on your back is love. That exhaustion is just another form of belonging. I used to believe I was chosen because I was capable. But I wasn't chosen. I was convenient. The first real fracture came at 19, when I was in college, and I called home crying after my first real panic attack. My father said, "You're fine. You've always been the strong one." Then he hung up. I never brought it up again. That was the year I started to dissociate from needing them. Not out of strength, but necessity. You can only slam your heart against a locked door so many times before you stop knocking. But they never stopped knocking on mine. Especially when it came to money. When I got my first full-time job, my mother called it our little miracle. I thought she meant she was proud. She meant now I could help more. At 22, I was covering their overdue phone bills. At 24, I was loaning them cash just until your father's bonus clears. That bonus never came. At 26, they asked if I'd consider co-signing a loan for a home renovation. They made it sound like an honor. Like I was being brought into something important. A family investment. I said yes because I didn't know how to say no. Now I do. Looking back, it's so clear. The patterns. The roles. The subtle shifts in responsibility that became permanent fixtures. I wasn't their daughter. I was their financial plan. A walking insurance policy. The reliable one. The fallback. I was never their first choice, just the safest one. And God, that realization is more painful than any scream or slap. Because it wasn't loud, it was quiet. Systematic. Engineered. Not a single moment of explosive cruelty to point to. Just years of careful, intentional conditioning. Emotional abuse with a smile. And the worst part? They believed it too. That this was normal. That they were loving me. That I was being honored through duty. They never once asked how I was doing. Not really. They asked what I could do for them. The questions were always logistical. Never emotional. I could have been bleeding inside, and they would have asked if I could help with taxes. The moment it all clicked wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday. I was going through old boxes, trying to declutter, and I found a birthday card from when I turned 16. It was from my mother. Inside it said, "So proud of everything you do for this family. We're lucky to have someone so capable. Keep making us proud." There was no "I love you." Just instructions. Expectations. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. That card had meant everything to me back then. I'd kept it like a relic. Now, I saw it for what it was, programming. I sat on the floor for an hour, holding that card, shaking. And when I finally stood, I knew something had broken in me. Not something fragile, something false. The illusion that I was loved unconditionally. That I mattered beyond what I could offer. That realization hurt more than any memory. Because once you see the truth, you can't go back. You can't pretend the leash is jewelry. You can't call the cage a home. I was never loved. I was used. And once I stopped being useful, they would discard me like they do with anyone who threatens their illusion of self-righteousness. That was the final shift. That was the moment I stopped trying to prove I was worthy. Because their approval was never about me. It was about control. Obedience was the currency. And I'd been paying for years. But not anymore. It started with a call from my mother on a rainy Thursday, her voice sharp with inconvenience. "Your father's been swamped at work. I need you to go over the tax folders. You're good at that sort of thing, right?" It wasn't a question. It never is. Just another delegation, disguised as flattery. I said yes, of course. I always had. That reflex still lived in me, even though I was learning to listen to the part of myself that flinched when they asked for help. She dropped the files off the next morning in a canvas bag with a post-it stuck to the top, 2020 to 2023, don't mix them up this time. I stared at her handwriting and felt nothing. No rage. No sadness. Just a readiness I couldn't name yet. I didn't open the bag for 2 days. I told myself I was busy, but the truth was, I was building the quiet space I needed. I wasn't looking for anything, I just didn't trust them to be clean. That's how you grow up in a toxic family, you stop expecting honesty and start anticipating where the rot is hiding. When I finally unzipped the bag, the scent of stale paper and cold ink filled my apartment like something old trying to breathe again. I laid everything out in piles, W-2s, 1099s, mortgage records, loan documents. At first, it looked normal. Chaotic, yes. But nothing out of place. Until it wasn't. The first red flag came in the form of a duplicated bank statement. 2 versions. One showed standard deposits and withdrawals. The other had a line item that didn't exist in the first copy, $12,500 labeled consulting income. I traced the transaction back to a check my father deposited under a small LLC name I didn't recognize. I Googled it. The address on the registration? Mine. My apartment. My actual living space. My home was the listed business headquarters of something I'd never heard of. I should have felt panic, but I didn't. I felt still. Very, very still. That eerie clarity that only comes when everything finally starts making sense. I kept digging. Faster now. Smarter. I wasn't looking to fix anything anymore. I was investigating. And the further I went, the more knots began to unravel. Misreported income. Assets quietly shifted. Old insurance policies I never signed for. Investments purchased in my name, with my social security number, my address, my identity, used not as a person, but as a tool. I remember the exact second I realized I was looking at financial manipulation on a level that was almost surgical. My mother always said I was so good with paperwork. I understand now. I was always the backup plan. The name they used when theirs didn't look good on a form. The signature they forged when they needed something to disappear into someone clean. They counted on my silence, my reliability, my ignorance. They never thought I'd ask questions. And they never thought I'd look twice. One file in particular made me go cold. A small life insurance policy. Tiny print. A beneficiary line that named my father, but the insured person was me. I don't even remember signing up for anything like that. It was dated 3 years ago, and the premium had been paid quarterly, quietly, from an account I hadn't touched in years. I sat back, heart pounding without rhythm. My life had been collateral for a man who wouldn't pay for his own dinner. I started printing everything. I made copies. Filed them. Labeled them with sticky notes in colors that felt like war paint. I wasn't sure what I would do with them yet. But I needed the truth in my hands, not just in my head. Truth has weight when you put it on paper. Truth becomes evidence. I wasn't just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was a witness. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how casually they had done it. That was the worst part. The sheer ease of it. No great cover-up. Just quiet erasure. My name substituted like spare change. My address used like scrap paper. It wasn't malicious in the cinematic way, no cloak and dagger, no villainous grins. Just indifference. And that was so much more terrifying. Because people who know they're doing wrong can be reasoned with. But people who believe they're entitled to you. There's something else entirely. Somewhere between uncovering the third hidden credit line and realizing they'd used my emergency contact information for a property lease in another state, I started to laugh. Not loudly. Just a sharp exhale. A realization. They didn't think I'd notice because they had spent my whole life training me not to look. I wasn't supposed to notice. I was supposed to keep fixing things. Keep earning love. Keep cleaning up the mess. But now I was awake. The awakening wasn't loud or dramatic. It was methodical. Like a fog lifting in slow degrees. I could trace the entire pattern now, how they'd rewarded me for obedience, punished me for independence, and cloaked their exploitation in the language of family. I saw how every praise was a leash. How every request came with invisible barbed wire. How they weaponized guilt, especially financial guilt, and called it closeness. I had a friend once, Sabrina, who told me years ago that my family used me. That they were emotionally abusive, not just dysfunctional. I had stopped talking to her after that. Not because she was wrong. But because she said it out loud. And back then, I wasn't ready to choose truth over belonging. Now, I wonder how much time I lost silencing the people who tried to help. I stayed up until dawn organizing files. I created a digital folder. Backed it up twice. Sent encrypted copies to my personal email and a flash drive I tucked inside a book on my shelf, The Art of War. Because of course. At 5:47 a.m., I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by papers that told the real story of my family, and I realized I wasn't powerless. I was informed. And that was infinitely more dangerous to them. I could confront them. Expose them. I could go to the authorities. But I wouldn't, not yet. That's what they'd expect. Immediate emotion. Drama. Rage. They'd twist it. Turn it back on me. Call me unstable. Ungrateful. But I wasn't unstable. I was calculating. They taught me responsibility. They taught me control. And now I would use it, with precision. With patience. The kind of patience only someone who's been quiet their entire life could possess. The weight of betrayal didn't crush me. It sharpened me. I no longer felt like a daughter. I felt like a surgeon with a scalpel and a secret. And the cut was coming. I didn't yell. I didn't confront. I didn't even flinch. I just disappeared. Quietly. Strategically. Like smoke slipping through cracks in a wall. The kind of silence that doesn't announce itself. The kind that makes people uncomfortable because it isn't passive, it's intentional. I didn't call. I didn't offer updates. I ignored the small baited texts, hope you're well, haven't heard from you, just checking in, each one more performative than the last. For the first time in my life, I made no effort to manage their emotions. And that, more than anything, made them panic. At first, they didn't notice. A few missed calls and unanswered email. That was still within their acceptable range of neglect. But by week 2, my mother left a voicemail that began with concern and ended in accusation. "I don't know what's going on with you lately. You're being distant, and it's really not fair to the family." Fair. That word. As if fairness had ever been currency in our home. As if silence wasn't the only language I was ever allowed to speak. I listened to the message 3 times. Once for content. Twice for tone. She was unraveling, subtly. Not yet fear, just friction. That inability to control me, to pull the strings that had always been so easily accessible. My absence had become the loudest thing in the room. And I knew they would try to fill it. My father sent a group text 2 days later, a rare event in itself, family dinner next weekend. Our treat this time. Hope you can make it. Our treat. I read those 2 words over and over, wondering how much discomfort it cost them to type them out. That phrase was a peace offering wrapped in bait. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement. Just a calculated pivot. If they couldn't dominate me with guilt, they'd seduce me with generosity. I didn't respond. That week, I became a mirror. Reflecting everything back without absorbing a thing. My sister texted to ask if I could help her with a complicated document for her custody case. I told her I wasn't available. No explanation. No excuse. The silence that followed was louder than any thank you I'd never received. My brother called to catch up, his voice too sweet, too casual. I let it ring. And when it stopped, I smiled. Because for once, I wasn't chasing the illusion of family. I was observing it, clinically, like a specimen. Inside that silence, I found power. Not dramatic, chest-thumping strength. A quieter kind. The kind born from restraint. From choosing not to feed the machine. They had always trained me to respond. To serve. To perform. But now, I was rewriting the script. And the more I pulled away, the more obvious the toxicity became. Not just to me, but to them. My absence disrupted the choreography. My refusal to play exposed their reliance on my role. I wasn't just the reliable one. I was the glue. And they were finally starting to feel what it meant to lose me. My mother's next message was a masterpiece in passive aggression. "We've just been worried. You used to care about this family. You used to make time." That's what they do, narcissistic families. They weaponize your history. They use your past kindness to gaslight your present boundaries. But I didn't bite. I archived the message. I didn't even open the photo she sent of some childhood memory, me at 6, smiling next to a Christmas tree, unaware I was being shaped into a servant with glitter in her hair. The restraint was harder than I expected. Not because I missed them. But because part of me still wanted to be acknowledged. Not loved. Just seen. I had spent so long begging for scraps of recognition that silence felt like withdrawal symptoms. But I reminded myself daily, this isn't punishment, it's protection. I wasn't hurting them. I was choosing me. Maybe for the first time in my life. In the quiet, I revisited the documents I had uncovered. Studied them. Labeled them with fresh eyes. The depth of their manipulation was staggering. The casual entitlement. The precision with which they had used me, not just emotionally, but financially. And it made their recent attempts at reconciliation feel even more grotesque. They weren't trying to repair anything. They were trying to recalibrate. Get me back into position. The dependable daughter. The emotionally available accountant. The unpaid therapist. The silent accomplice. I began journaling again. Not like before, with hope or hurt. This time, it was documentation. Every message. Every voicemail. Every shift in tone. I recorded it all. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. But I knew it mattered. Because when they came back, and they'd bring stories. Rewritings. Victimhood. And I would have the truth. Not just in paper. In memory. In detail. The days stretched longer. I slept better. Ate slower. For the first time in years, my apartment felt like a sanctuary and not a crash site. There were no unexpected favors waiting. No emotional bombs ticking in my inbox. Just silence. And choice. I started to remember who I was before they told me who to be. The girl who loved order, not because it pleased others, but because it made her feel safe. The woman who found comfort in knowing exactly where her boundaries were, and the courage to enforce them. And then the second dinner invitation came. This time by email. Formal. Precise. We'd love to host you for dinner this Saturday. Just us. No pressure. We miss you. The words were almost sweet. Like sugar dissolving poison. But it was the signature that twisted my stomach. Love, Mom and Dad. They rarely used that word. Not unless they wanted something. Not unless they feared something. I closed the laptop and stared at the wall for a long time. Not thinking. Just feeling. That shift. That moment when prey turns predator, not in violence, but in awareness. I could see the game now. I could hear the quiet desperation in their polite phrasing. They didn't miss me. They missed their tool. Their buffer. Their image of being good parents. And now, that image was slipping. I opened the email again. Read it like a script. Then I clicked reply and typed one line. What time should I be there? No emojis. No warmth. Just readiness. Because I wasn't going back to be their daughter. I was going back as their consequence. The first time I stepped into the law office, I expected to feel nervous. I expected my hands to sweat, my voice to catch, my confidence to flicker under fluorescent lighting and framed degrees. But none of that happened. I sat across from a woman with clear eyes and a sharper mind, and I told her everything. Not dramatically. Not with tears. Just facts. Clean, cold, and undeniable. She listened, nodding as she skimmed the copies I handed her, bank statements, insurance policies, forged signatures, addresses tied to LLCs I'd never heard of. When she finally looked up, she said, "You have enough for a case, but this won't be about court, it'll be about leverage." And for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. I wasn't interested in public destruction. Not yet. That wasn't the kind of revenge I needed. I wasn't looking to shame them on social media or blow up the family group chat. I wanted something deeper. Quieter. I wanted them to feel powerless in the exact way they had made me feel for years. So I took the chessboard approach. Every move deliberate. Every document a piece. Every conversation weighed for tone and timing. The lawyer, her name was Renee, connected me with a forensic accountant. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and had the patience of a man who understood that money told stories people didn't want to hear. Within days, he confirmed what I already suspected: several assets had been tucked under my name without legal consent. Some of them weren't even fully traceable yet, but the trails were there, faint, like footprints in dry dirt, but real. This wasn't sloppy, he said. This was calculated. Whoever did this thought you'd never look. I nodded. Because of course they did. My parents had always mistaken my silence for submission. But silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's survival. And now, that silence had turned into the thing that would undo them. I created 3 binders. One for legal documentation. One for financial mapping. And one for personal records, emails, voicemails, text screenshots. I labeled them not by subject, but by intent. Proof. Pattern. Power. I ran every scenario in my mind like a war game. What if they deny? What if they guilt trip? What if they threaten? I rehearsed responses in front of the mirror, not with emotion, but with precision. Calm was my currency now. There was one particular file that changed the pace of everything. It was a trust account, modest in size but layered in complexity. I was listed as a partial beneficiary, with clauses that suggested I had agreed to certain financial liabilities in exchange. Except I hadn't. My signature was there, yes, but it wasn't mine. Not really. It looked like mine, in the way a copy of a key still opens a door. But I knew the way I looped my R, the curve of my Y. Whoever had signed it had practiced. Repeatedly. Someone had forged my consent, likely over a kitchen counter, believing I would never dare ask for truth. I stared at that page for a long time. It wasn't rage I felt. It was precision. Like I'd found the final missing screw in a machine I was about to disassemble. That signature wasn't just proof, it was permission. Not legally, but emotionally. It gave me the clarity I needed to cross the line between doubt and certainty. This wasn't family dysfunction. This was financial exploitation. This was fraud. And I wasn't going to be their casualty anymore. I took the document to Renee. She smiled faintly, like a soldier recognizing a tactical win. "They've given you everything you need," she said. "Now it's just about when you want to use it." Timing mattered. That's what made this feel less like a plan and more like a dance. If I moved too fast, they'd sense it. If I waited too long, they might cover their tracks. But there was something poetic about the invitation they'd extended, the dinner. The one where they promised to treat me, to reconnect. I hadn't answered with excitement. I'd answered with strategy. Because if they wanted a performance, I would give them one. But this time I'd be the one writing the script. At night, I practiced stillness. Not just physically, but emotionally. I stopped reacting to their provocations. My mother called to ask if I was bringing dessert to the dinner. I said no. Flat. Final. She hesitated, just long enough to reveal her discomfort. My father sent a message asking if I could bring the documents he'd left behind from last time. I didn't respond. He didn't follow up. Silence was starting to become my favorite weapon. But there was still risk. What if they caught on? What if they sensed the shift? That's the danger of strategic revenge, it's a balancing act. One wrong word, one flash of expression, and they'd go on defense. They'd lawyer up. They'd twist the narrative like they always had. I couldn't give them that head start. So I became what they trained me to be, controlled, composed, cooperative. A mask so perfect, it made them comfortable. And when people like them are comfortable, they become careless. In the days leading up to the dinner, I created a private account under a different bank. I transferred small amounts of money from my old account daily, just enough to drain the co-signed funds without triggering alerts. I filed a fraud alert under my name, claiming identity concerns. It wasn't a lie. Not anymore. I changed passwords. Moved titles. Froze joint access. With every step, I took back another piece of what they'd stolen. Each task felt like an exhale. Like loosening a noose I hadn't realized was around my neck. I started to sleep. Not deeply. Not yet. But enough to feel real air in my lungs. The morning of the dinner, I laid out my outfit with care, simple, elegant, soft lines, neutral tones. Non-threatening. I wanted to look like the daughter they thought they still had. I wanted them to feel in control. People like them always overreach when they feel secure. That would be their final mistake. Before I left, I placed the 3 binders into my bag. Just in case. I didn't intend to use them tonight. But they were coming with me. Like armor. Like a reminder. I paused at the mirror. Studied myself. Same eyes. Same hands. But something was different now. I looked like someone who had nothing left to prove. Only something to deliver. I turned off the light and walked out the door. The hostess greeted me with a smile, the same way she had weeks ago when I stood in this very lobby holding my coat, humiliated and cornered. But this time, I didn't feel like a child being summoned, I felt like the storm that no one saw coming. The restaurant looked the same, of course. Same soft jazz, same dim lighting meant to make expensive discomfort feel elegant. But everything inside me had shifted. The weight that used to press into my chest was gone. I moved differently now. Not heavier. Just more intentional. More aware of the silence I carried with me and how dangerous it could be. They were already seated when I arrived, my father in his usual corner spot, back straight, palms flat on the table like he was prepared to negotiate something. My mother was sipping wine and laughing at something on her phone. She didn't notice me until I stood beside the table. Then came the performance, arms outstretched, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There she is. We missed you. The words were sweet. The tone was surveillance. I let her hug me, let her air kiss my cheek, and pretended not to notice how she subtly scanned my outfit for weakness. My father stood, offered his hand like we were business partners. Glad you made it. We were just talking about your new place. Settling in okay? I nodded, offering only what they expected of me, vague warmth, nothing sharp. Just enough to keep them from looking too closely. It's quiet, I said. Good for thinking. They had pre-ordered a bottle of wine, the expensive kind. We figured we'd treat you this time, my mother said, pouring generously into my glass. I watched the red swirl, catching the low glow of the overhead light, and wondered if she even remembered what she said the last time we were here. If she recalled the way she'd pushed the bill toward me without hesitation. Probably not. People like her don't remember the cuts they make, they only notice when you bleed in public. I sat quietly, sipping the wine, nodding at their rehearsed stories. My brother was back in school, my sister was seeing someone new. The usual narratives. Polished, performative, curated for the version of me they thought still existed. They spoke as though nothing had shifted. As though this dinner was a reunion, not a rebalancing. But every word they spoke landed like a pawn on a board I'd already mapped out. I knew the game. I knew their moves. I just had better ones. The waiter arrived and smiled warmly at me. Good to see you again. My father laughed. She's a regular here. He thought it was funny. Thought he was clever. My mother ordered 3 appetizers for the table, and my father added a rare steak and lobster combo, then glanced at me. Order whatever you like. It's on us tonight. That was the tell. The invitation. The carrot dangled to make me drop my guard. I thanked him, smiling just enough to give him comfort. I think I'll start with the heirloom salad. They exchanged glances. Subtle, but I caught it. Confusion, maybe. Disappointment that I wasn't more excited by their sudden generosity. Because they didn't know I had already fed myself before I came. I wasn't hungry, not for their food, and definitely not for their approval. As the evening stretched, I let them talk. I let them fill the silence with old memories, references to childhood vacations, inside jokes meant to draw me back in. I nodded. I played the role. But underneath every glance, every sip of wine, I was listening. Documenting. Because nothing they said was for connection, it was for control. Even kindness was currency. My mother leaned forward at one point, her voice softer. You've been so distant lately. Everything okay? I held her gaze, slow and steady. Just been busy, I said. Working on a few things. My father chimed in. If you're in trouble, you can tell us. We're family. That word. Family. Always used like a shield. Like a leash. I looked at him and smiled with something that wasn't amusement. No trouble. I've just been organizing. He paused, wine glass halfway to his mouth. Organizing? I nodded. Documents. Records. Accounts. It's amazing what you find when you really look. The silence that followed was sharp. Thin. It lasted just a second too long. My mother laughed it off. You always were the little bookkeeper. So meticulous. We could use more of that around here. And there it was, the attempt to reset the balance. Praise as a lure. But I let it pass, untouched. When the entrees arrived, they focused on the food. Commented on the seasoning. Compared it to the last place we went. They acted like everything was fine, like their world hadn't already started cracking. But I could see it now, the tension beneath their movements, the slight tightening of my father's jaw every time I didn't respond how I used to. The way my mother's fingers tapped her wine glass too quickly, like she was trying to distract herself from a truth she couldn't quite name. They were losing grip. And they didn't know why. That was the beauty of it. The meal ended with dessert. They insisted I choose. You've earned it, my father said. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how desperate it sounded. Like he was trying to offer me something sweet before the inevitable sour. I asked for the crème brûlée. Full circle. The same one she'd mocked weeks ago. This time, I savored it slowly, letting the silence build between bites. And then, just like last time, the check arrived. The waiter placed it carefully at the center of the table. Not in front of me. Not in front of them. Just there, neutral. Waiting. I leaned back in my seat and folded my hands in my lap. No one moved. My mother sipped her wine. My father adjusted his napkin. Seconds passed like hours. Still, no one touched the folder. And I said nothing. The silence was thick now. Not awkward, unnerving. It sat there, a fourth guest at the table. The check between us like a loaded gun no one wanted to reach for. Finally, my father cleared his throat. So, how's work going? I smiled. And let the bill sit. The silence after my smile lingered like smoke. My father shifted in his seat, a little too fast, like the chair had suddenly grown uncomfortable. My mother looked at the bill again, as if perhaps it would blink and move to someone else's side. But I stayed still, calm, a quiet force at the end of the table. I wanted them to feel it, the power vacuum. The unfamiliar absence of my usual rescue. No reach for the check. No awkward laugh. Just stillness. Watching them try to figure out what went wrong in the performance they thought they were still directing. My mother finally slid the folder toward herself with forced grace. We'll get it this time, she said, her voice light, a little brittle. It's the least we can do. I almost admired the speed of her pivot. She didn't want to admit she was surprised. But she was. My father nodded slowly, pulling out his wallet like a man pulling a weapon in a duel he didn't expect to fight. He didn't look at me. Not yet. We walked out of the restaurant into the crisp night air. The valet brought the car around. The same car I'd co-signed for years ago, before I understood that love in this family came with financial fine print. We'll give you a ride, my father offered. No need, I said, holding up my keys. I parked close. I didn't. But I wanted space. Control. The moment had to happen on my terms. Still, they lingered. Like they knew something was coming, even if they couldn't name it. I stepped in closer. Just enough. Close enough to speak softly but cut deeply. By the way, I said, you might start seeing a few letters in the mail. Just procedural stuff. My father raised an eyebrow. Letters? About the accounts, I said. The ones in my name. The color drained from his face almost imperceptibly, but I saw it. My mother blinked too fast, her smile faltering. What accounts? She asked. I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. Oh, you know. The ones tied to the LLCs. The trust documents. The insurance policy I didn't know existed until 2 months ago. I paused. The forged signature was a nice touch, by the way. You were close. My mother's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Of course, I added, everything's already been filed. Fraud alerts, documentation. The attorney was very thorough. I let the words settle like dust on glass, delicate, but suffocating. My father stepped forward. Now hold on, he said, trying to gather the old tone, the one that once bent my spine and made me second-guess my own breath. Let's not be dramatic here. Whatever this is, I'm sure there's a reasonable. There isn't, I said. Calm. Measured. There's paperwork. That's all there is now. He laughed once, dry, forced. You don't want to blow this out of proportion. We're family. That word again. A cage. A muzzle. I looked him directly in the eye. Family doesn't make their daughter the collateral. My mother tried to speak, but I held up a hand. It's already in motion, I said. The IRS. The financial institutions. The insurance boards. The co-signed loans. Every thread has been pulled, and now it's unraveling. I didn't come here to warn you. I came to watch you realize it's too late. The silence was thick. The wind shifted. You could ruin everything, my mother whispered. Her voice wasn't angry. It was afraid. You'll destroy our reputation. That was the moment I realized she still thought this was about shame. About embarrassment. As if my goal was to humiliate them. As if her reputation was the only thing at stake. I'm not interested in ruining you, I said. That would require more energy than you're worth. I'm just returning the favor. You built a life using me as the foundation. I've simply removed myself. The cracks? Those are yours. My father opened his mouth, but I turned and walked to my car without waiting for another word. The drive home was silent, deliberate. Every stoplight felt like punctuation. Every turn, a chapter closing. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. There was no surge of triumph, no cinematic swell of justice. Just clarity. Just the precision of a knife finally withdrawn after years in the flesh. At home, I plugged in my phone and scrolled through the scheduled filings. One by one, the systems were triggering, notifications sent, access revoked, alerts issued. The quiet, merciless machinery of accountability. Not vengeance. Just correction. Over the next few days, the calls started. My mother left voicemails that swung between pleading and fury. You're making a mistake. We can fix this. I don't understand why you're doing this to us. But she never once said sorry. Never once asked how I felt. Because even now, they didn't believe I was owed anything beyond guilt. My father texted once. Just one sentence, you always were ungrateful. I didn't respond. Because this wasn't about gratitude. It was about gravity. Actions. Consequences. The long, overdue closing of an account that had been draining me since childhood. Renee called with updates. The accountant confirmed several fraudulent filings. Legal channels had been initiated. They could try to push back, of course. Try to smear, deflect, play victim. But the paper trail was too clean. My case wasn't built on emotion. It was built on evidence. That's what made it irreversible. I sat at my kitchen table that night, flipping through the copies of documents, watching the power shift in silent, organized lines of black ink. They had underestimated me so deeply, for so long, that they forgot I was watching. That I was listening. That I had learned from every manipulation they thought I didn't notice. They taught me responsibility. I turned it into a weapon. They taught me to endure. I turned it into leverage. They taught me to stay silent. I turned it into strategy. This wasn't vengeance born in fire. It was born in cold, deliberate planning. It didn't scream. It whispered. It filled the spaces between their egos like smoke, until they couldn't breathe without tasting what they'd done. They built a house of cards using my name. I pulled one piece and watched it collapse. The silence didn't feel victorious. It felt wide. Still. Like the air after a hurricane, when the trees have stopped bending and the sky pretends it was never angry. I thought I'd feel elated. Relieved. Empowered. But mostly, I just felt empty. Not in the way sadness hollows you out, but in the way a wound finally closes. The pain was gone, but the scar was there, quiet, permanent, and shaped like their names. The phone had stopped ringing. No more voicemails. No more desperate text threads. No more disguised threats dressed as family concern. Just silence. Which, ironically, had always been their greatest punishment for me. When I was younger, silence meant disapproval. Disconnection. Being cast out. Now, silence was a gift I'd given myself. The kind of silence that doesn't ache. The kind that protects. I didn't check the case updates daily anymore. The filings were still moving through the systems, some frozen, some triggered, some flagged for review. There were no more decisions to make. No steps to execute. The work was done. The walls had been built, the locks changed, the doors closed. And still, I waited, part of me expecting them to find some way back in, to twist one last guilt-laced apology into a weapon. But they didn't. Because they couldn't. That was the power of doing things by the book. By the law. They couldn't scream their way through a judge. They couldn't charm a bank system. They couldn't manipulate IRS algorithms. This time, there was no emotional terrain to conquer. Only consequences. And consequences don't care about your version of the story. The house of control they built had collapsed under its own weight, and I hadn't needed to raise my voice to make it fall. It was a strange feeling, waking up with no narrative to defend. I didn't have to justify my distance. Didn't have to explain my boundaries to people determined to violate them. There was nothing left to prove. I used to replay old arguments in my head, imagining better comebacks, sharper words. Now I didn't need them. Silence had done what words never could. It had ended the war. There were quiet moments of grief, of course. That part no one warned you about, the grief of things that never existed. I didn't mourn them. I mourned the fantasy I built around them. The idea of parents who protected, who saw me, who loved without ledger sheets and expectations. I had to bury the version of myself that kept trying to resurrect that dream. She was always so hopeful, so tired. She didn't know that love isn't supposed to come with terms and transactions. She believed that if she just worked harder, bent more, became more useful, she'd earn a real seat at the table. I loved her. And I had to let her go. There's a quiet kind of strength in boundaries. Not the kind that announces itself or demands to be understood. But the kind that simply exists. That says, you can rage all you want, I'm not moving. It felt foreign at first. Saying no. Saying nothing. Declining invitations. Ignoring attempts at rewrites. Letting people call me difficult, distant, ungrateful. But the truth is, if you need to be broken to be understood by someone, that person was never listening in the first place. I began to reclaim little parts of my life that had always belonged to them. The calendar, for one. I stopped planning around birthdays I was only invited to for appearances. Holidays I used to dread, where I'd sit at the table with a fake smile and a growing sense of nausea. I made my own rituals. I cooked meals for myself. Lit candles with no one to impress. I spent weekends doing nothing, without shame. My time belonged to me now. My peace wasn't negotiable. I started telling the truth in small conversations, with friends, with coworkers, even with strangers. I no longer softened the story. No longer said, they just don't know better, or it wasn't that bad. It was that bad. It just didn't look like it from the outside. And that's the hardest kind of abuse to name, the the kind that smiles in family photos. The kind that dresses in politeness. The kind that convinces even the victim that it's not abuse, it's just family dynamics. I spoke the words out loud. They used me. They lied to me. They manipulated me. They never really saw me. And now they never will again. And I didn't flinch. People talk about revenge like it's about destruction. Fire. Fury. But real revenge, the kind that lasts, is about subtraction. Quiet removal. Walking away without warning and never turning back. It's not about them begging. It's about you no longer needing them to. One morning, I checked my mail and saw a hand-addressed envelope from a name I didn't recognize. Inside was a simple letter from someone in legal compliance at the bank where one of the forged accounts had been registered. The contents were brief: confirmation of the fraud claim, acknowledgement of documentation, final approval of action taken. There was nothing dramatic about it. No applause. No, you were right. Just clean, printed justice. I smiled, folded the letter, and tucked it into a folder labeled final. Later that day, my sister called from an unknown number. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice soft and careful, testing the edges. We're all kind of confused. Hurt. You never gave us a chance to talk things through. You just left. You know that's not how families fix things. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. Because we weren't a family. We were a hierarchy. A system of debt and silence. And I had broken the chain. People ask what freedom feels like. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like space. Breath. It feels like a locked door with you on the inside and the chaos on the other side, unable to reach you anymore. It feels like peace. I walked to the cafe I used to avoid because it reminded me of arguments in the parking lot and birthday dinners that ended in guilt. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and opened a book I was finally reading for pleasure, not escape. Outside, people moved like they always had. Unaware. Unburdened. And I realized, for the first time, I felt like one of them. No more secrets weighing down my lungs. No more invisible leash around my neck. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I wasn't the fixer. I wasn't the family's foundation. I was me. And I was free. The story closes not with confrontation, but with a silence they can't break, a silence shaped by boundaries they never thought I'd have the strength to draw. My parents now live within the ruins of their own entitlement, frozen accounts, revoked access, whispered questions from friends and neighbors who once admired the illusion they performed so well. But I don't watch them burn. I walk away from the fire without turning back. The real reward isn't revenge, it's release. Freedom from the weight of their expectations, their manipulations, their version of love that always came with a receipt. I never needed them to apologize. I only needed them to lose their grip on me. And they did. The family dynamic doesn't end in flames, it simply folds. Quietly. Tragically. A collapsed house of cards, with no one left willing to rebuild it. Because I've rebuilt myself. So now I ask you. Have you ever paid the price for someone else's comfort? What did it cost you to finally say enough? Share your story. Someone like me is still holding the bill. They taught me how to pay for everything, so I learned how to stop paying for them,